The forbidden topic Princess Leonor is never allowed to mention. A few days ago, something happened that most people completely missed. Not a scandal, not a shocking headline, not a dramatic palace announcement. Just a simple moment. A question was asked, and once again, there was no answer. That's what caught my attention. Because when you're dealing with royal families, especially in 2026, the most interesting stories are often not the things they say. They're the things they never say. And when it comes to Princess Leonor, there seems to be one category of subjects that always disappears from public conversations almost as quickly as it appears. Why? And more importantly, what does that silence actually tell us? Because I don't think this story is really about a forbidden topic. I think it's about the future of a monarchy that is trying to survive in a world that demands constant transparency. And that's where things get fascinating. Let's talk about it. For anyone paying attention recently, you've probably noticed something. Princess Leonor has been everywhere. Military training, official engagements, international appearances, public ceremonies. Every move seems carefully documented. Every photograph analyzed. Every expression discussed online. Yet despite all that visibility, there are still certain areas of her life that remain almost completely untouched. And that's unusual, especially in 2026. We're living in an era where public figures share everything. Athletes share their routines. Actors share their relationships. Influencers share breakfast. Some people even livestream their daily lives. But future monarchs? Different story. And that's where Leonor stands apart from almost everyone else her age. Because while the public sees her constantly, they know surprisingly little about her. And I think that's intentional. Now before we go further, if you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe. I post every day. Because the deeper you dive into modern royalty, the more you realize the real story is almost never the headline everyone is talking about. It's usually hidden somewhere underneath it. And that's exactly what we're exploring today. Here's my first observation. The media often focuses on what Leonor is doing. Military exercises, training programs, diplomatic preparation, official responsibilities. But notice how rarely the conversation moves toward what Leonor actually thinks. Not because journalists don't want to know. Of course they do. The public wants to know too. But modern monarchies operate on a completely different set of rules. The less personal opinion a future monarch expresses publicly, the safer the institution becomes. And that's not just true in Spain. Look at Britain. Look at other European royal houses. The formula is remarkably similar. Visibility without vulnerability. Familiarity without complete access. Public presence without personal exposure. That's the balancing act. And honestly, I think Leonor may be carrying more pressure than many people realize. Imagine being one of the most recognized young women in Europe. Imagine knowing that every sentence you say could become tomorrow's headline. Imagine understanding that one casual remark could create political controversy. Most people her age can change their minds publicly. Future queens don't always get that luxury. And that's why I think the so-called forbidden topic isn't necessarily one specific subject. It's something much bigger. It's personal freedom. Think about it. What happens when an entire country sees you as a symbol before it sees you as a person? What topics become dangerous? Politics, relationships, family disagreements, personal frustrations, future ambitions. Any of them could create headlines. Any of them could distract from the institution itself. And that's where my perspective starts to differ from the mainstream coverage. Because many commentators treat royal silence as mysterious. I don't. I think it's strategic. In fact, I think silence might be one of the most powerful tools a monarchy still has. The less information available, the more speculation fills the gap. And strangely enough, that often keeps public interest alive. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Compare Leonor's situation to what's happening elsewhere. While Prince William and Catherine continue representing a more traditional royal image in Britain, Spain's royal family has been trying to modernize while maintaining stability. Those two goals don't always work together. Modernization requires openness. Stability often requires restraint. And Leonor sits directly between those competing forces. She's young enough to represent change, yet traditional enough to preserve continuity. That's not an easy role. In fact, I'd argue it's one of the hardest jobs in Europe right now. Because every generation expects something different from royalty. Older generations often value dignity and discretion. Younger generations tend to value authenticity and openness. How do you satisfy both? That's the challenge. And every time Leonor avoids discussing certain topics, she's essentially navigating that impossible equation. Now here's a question I keep coming back to. What if the silence itself is the message? Seriously, think about that for a second. What if the palace isn't trying to hide something? What if they're trying to protect something? There's a difference. Because protecting an institution and hiding information aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And that's where public debate becomes so complicated. One person sees secrecy, another sees professionalism. One person sees control, another sees discipline. Both can look identical from the outside. That's why I always encourage people to look beyond the headline. Ask yourself, who benefits from this narrative? Why is this particular story being emphasized right now? Why are we talking about certain subjects and not others? Those questions often reveal more than the official statements ever do. And speaking of narratives, let's address something else. Social media has completely changed the rules. 20 years ago, royal households could shape information far more effectively. Today, not a chance. Every appearance becomes a viral clip. Every gesture becomes a theory. Every facial expression becomes evidence of something. Sometimes it feels like people are trying to decode a secret message from every photograph. And honestly, I think that's one reason Leonor's public communication remains so carefully managed. The stakes are simply higher. One misunderstood comment can travel around the world in minutes. That's the reality of leadership in the digital age. Now let me give you a slightly controversial take. I think the public often asks the wrong question. People ask, what is Leonor not allowed to say? But maybe the better question is, what responsibilities come with what she does say? Because future monarchs don't just speak for themselves. Their words can affect governments, institutions, diplomatic relationships, national conversations. That's a very different standard than the one applied to ordinary public figures. And whether people agree with monarchy or not, that responsibility is real. Now here's the part that fascinates me most. The future. Because eventually, every royal generation reaches a turning point. A moment when the old communication strategies stop working. A moment when the public expects something new. Could Leonor become the turning point? Maybe. Could she redefine how royal figures communicate? Possibly. But if that happens, it will likely happen slowly, carefully, deliberately, not through dramatic revelations, not through shocking interviews, not through breaking royal traditions overnight, but through small changes that accumulate over time. And that's why I think this entire discussion matters. Not because of a forbidden topic, but because of what it represents. The tension between privacy and transparency, tradition and modernization, institution and individuality, those are the real questions shaping Leonor's future. And honestly, they're shaping the future of modern monarchy itself. So what have I learned from all this? I've learned that silence is rarely empty. Sometimes silence is strategy, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's discipline, and sometimes it's simply the price of carrying expectations that most people can barely imagine. The biggest mistake we can make is assuming we already know what that silence means. Because often the most powerful stories aren't hidden behind locked doors. They're hidden inside the questions we're not asking. And when it comes to Princess Leonor, I suspect the conversation isn't really about a forbidden topic at all. It's about understanding why some topics become difficult for people born into extraordinary roles. The next time you see a headline claiming there's a secret, a ban, or a forbidden subject surrounding Leonor, pause for a moment. Ask yourself what story is actually being told. And more importantly, ask yourself what story isn't being told. Because in royal life, those two stories are almost never the same. And that may be the most revealing answer of all.